if you didn't think the land of enormous bugs, invasive snakes, and alligators could get worse, DeSantis made that his platform as governor.
Alligators are literally my worst fear in the world, and they're only my second least favorite part of Florida right now.
Seriously. So I thought that maybe DeSantis would slow down. Maybe he'd accomplished his horrible legislative agenda, having done so many terrible things in the past. But he has served up a brand new steaming hot batch of fucking horrible bills to punish the poor residents of Florida that put him in office by 20%.
Yikes. That hurts.
Yeah.
That hurts. Well, initially it was only by half a percentage point.
When he first entered office, and then they kept him there.
They almost had Andrew Gillum.
Yeah. They were so close. And then they were like, this steaming hot pile of bullshit pie is delicious. Let's sign me up.
God.
Yeah.
I just, you know how it is where if you took a true or false quiz and you just filled in random answers, statistically, you're probably going to get somewhere around 50% of them correct.
Sure.
The only way that you could possibly get every single answer incorrect is if you knew what the right answer was and purposely didn't do it. And I feel like that perfectly encapsulates Ron DeSantis and is why I put him in the category of evil motherfucker rather than just dumbass.
That is such a well-articulated point. Like, you're totally right. If he were just a normal level of ignorant or bad or frustrating or whatever, he would probably get stuff right periodically. He's passed tons of legislation. You'd think that maybe one of them would be okay. He is passed exclusively horseshit. And okay, so we've talked about Ron DeSantis before in the context of the presidential election, but we don't often talk about state governors and state governments in themselves, right? We're more of a federal show. We'd more talk about that. But I'd say there are three main reasons why you should give a shit about Ron DeSantis and Florida. One, maybe we should be paying more attention as individuals to the actions of state governments and legislative bodies. They really do control so many more aspects of our lives, and so many of the protections that we kind of take for granted are mainly only truly enforced on the federal government. And so there's a true risk of state lawmakers running afoul of them. And the second reason is that we are seeing a real trend of states taking that license and really running with it. We saw it with all of the abortion laws, and what we keep seeing is a single state will do something kind of outlandish and then find success there, and other states will follow suit. And so the potential to have literally half the country controlled by governments that impose draconian laws is really palpable. There's totally that risk. And finally, the reason that we kind of teased at the beginning is Ron DeSantis specific, which is he's currently the Republican second most likely to be president.
Yeah.
And these are the kinds of legislative moves that we might be able to expect from him as president. And a point that we made previously is certain of these laws he would be able to implement by himself, right? By changing some of the instructions that go out to the various executive agencies. So, something like limiting education or limiting funding for education, or some of the laws we're going to talk about, he might be able to implement, at least for a period of time, even if they get challenged in court, implement for a bit just by himself without the legislature. So he's truly dangerous as an individual as president because of the powers of the executive.
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing that we're seeing is that a lot of these laws are complete virtue signals.
Yeah.
And they're purposely written to be vague enough that he can pretend to have plausible deniability, but enough of a dog whistle to bring the most horrible people in the country on board.
Yes. Yeah. They are so shittily written,
Yeah.
especially when you compare one law to another. We'll talk through an example of this later, but like it's total fucking bullshit. Like they're just so poorly written. Partially it's totally by design. Partially it's
Yeah.
about just getting in the headlines and getting attention because he's been running for president for a while, just not on the official ballot.
I mean, we broke down the Don't Say Gay bill.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that we said was that it was purposely written so that the policies on a local level would almost certainly reflect specific anti-LGBTQ sentiment that in some cases could prevent teachers from like having a picture of their significant other if their significant other is the same gender. And of course, Ron DeSantis pretended like, oh, that's the stupidest accusation of the world. That would never happen. And it fucking happened.
Yeah. But yeah, your point about plausible deniability is so fair. But on top of that, to your point, like it enables through a lot of the enforcement mechanisms, which in some cases are like, you know, specific boards that are supposed to be established by the state with members appointed by the governor. In other cases, it's like giving parents the ability to sue schools, as in the Don't Say Gay bill example, sue schools over like the aspects of this law. What it enables is hyper-local enforcement and hyper-local rules, which means that it's very difficult to tell ahead of time what's going to violate these laws, which means that if you are running an organization, you pretty much are forced to interpret these laws in the most strict, most harsh fashion in order to avoid getting sued or held liable or like generally being held criminally liable for running afoul of these laws.
Yeah. Furthermore, this also gives DeSantis sound bites because what happens when he creates these laws or when he signs these laws is that a journalist asks him a question about the law and he uses that bullshit plausible deniability to speak over them, pretends to be this great hero crusading against the evil, terrible media.
Yeah.
And then he can clip out his outburst, put it on some campaign ad, and pretends to be a huge hero, when in actuality, he's just refusing to answer the question because if he actually answered it honestly, he'd have to admit that he's a bigoted piece of shit.
Yeah. And he knows that everybody on his side is going to interpret the laws in the way most favorable to him, and everybody on the other side won't, but he doesn't care about them because they're not the votes that he wants to get.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk about some of these horrible laws that he has recently signed and will be going into effect shortly. First off is the Protections of Medical Conscience Bill. You may have heard about this one. It's been in the news. This bill allows doctors in Florida to discriminate against LGBTQ people and deny them service with no ramifications for doing this, you know, for taking this action, and no obligation to refer them to any other medical service provider.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is for both providers and payers.
Yes.
So both insurance companies and doctors.
Yes.
And also they have a pretty broad definition of this as well, because it also applies to nurses, it applies to students, it applies to pharmacists. And what's interesting, because, you know, what DeSantis would do, what DeSantis is going to say when a person in the media asks him, hey, some of your critics say that this is going to give people license to discriminate against LGBT people. What would you say to that? He's going to be like, read the bill. Read the bill. Where does it say that? Where does it say that you can discriminate against? Like, it doesn't say that. God.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, that's what he's going to say.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. That is a completely dishonest argument. Here's why. There is a provision of the bill that specifically does talk about how the section, I'm reading from the actual text of the bill, quote, this section may not be construed to waive or modify any duty a healthcare provider or healthcare payer may have to provide or pay for other healthcare services that do not violate their right of medical conscience, to waive or modify any duty to provide any informed consent required by law, or to allow a healthcare provider or payer to opt out of providing healthcare services to any patient or potential patient because of that patient's or potential patient's race, color, religion, sex, or national origin.
Mm-hmm.
Explicitly, it does not say sexual orientation and it does not say gender identity.
Yep, exactly.
So the bill knows, the way it's written, the bill knows that this can be used to deny certain people.
Yeah.
And they gave a list of people that doesn't apply to, and specifically left sexual orientation and gender identity out of the bill.
Yeah.
So when DeSantis comes out there and says, oh, it doesn't even mention sexual orientation or gender identity. Yes. And that's the fucking problem.
Yes. Yeah. So if you as a medical provider or payer, and we have to emphasize the payer piece, claim to have a religious, moral, or ethical belief, you can deny service to anyone as long as it's not on the basis of race, color, sex, national origin, or religion, which is absurd. Access to healthcare is a fundamental part of being a human being.
Yeah.
You do not get to live if you do not get to receive medical care. Now, it does require that hospitals stabilize a patient who's in emergency condition. So they can't refuse service to an LGBTQ person if they're not in stable condition. So they've got to stabilize them, and then they can throw them out of the hospital.
Yeah.
It's also continues to be vague because sincerely held religious, moral, and ethical beliefs are not well defined, which means that you can just, look someone up and down and decide that they're not the patient for you and just deny them service. And going back to the insurance providers piece, this is really important because we know the business of insurance is not to pay for things, but to avoid paying for things.
Yeah.
That's how you make money as an insurance company, is by accepting premiums and paying out as little as possible.
Yeah.
And now, as little as possible can mean things like denying PrEP treatments to prevent HIV. It could mean things like denying gender affirming care. Maybe you don't like premarital sex and you've got carve outs that if the person's under 18 or whatever, you can't, provide them with birth control or won't be covered. The bill is both so vague and expansive, and also in what it leaves out is so clear that it is enabling medical providers and payers to just let a whole segment of the population die.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and that is not hyperbolic. That's what the bill says. That's what the bill lays out. And it also prevents taking away licensure or providing licensure to people that have expressed views about who deserves healthcare. And I'd just like to point out, this completely goes against the Hippocratic Oath.
Yeah.
Do no harm.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just saying, any doctor that would let somebody die or come to harm because of their identity, because they're gay or transgender or whatever, should have their license immediately revoked.
Yeah.
Immediately. They should not have a license because they are not practicing the ethics of the medical profession.
Exactly. It's required that you take that oath to become a doctor. It is no fucking joke.
Yeah. And I would like to point one thing out, though, a potential loophole that I think anybody who files a lawsuit or whatever should absolutely exploit.
Mm-hmm.
Think back to what I said about the non-discrimination clause. It does say sex.
Yes.
And according to Supreme Court precedent, the use of sex in non-discrimination laws can be applied to sexual orientation and gender identity. Mm-hmm. That has been established on the Supreme Court level. This Supreme Court, in fact,
Neil Gorsuch
upheld that as a precedent.
Neil Gorsuch wrote the opinion affirming that.
Yes.
We have a conservative court on record saying sex includes sexual orientation and gender identity.
Yeah. So if I were doing any lawsuits, if I were a hospital that was going to say, you know what, if anybody on my staff refuses to treat somebody because of their sexual orientation or their gender identity, fired. Mm-hmm. And when they sue, I would use that as the defense.
Yep.
I would use that as the defense. Because again, when it comes to a person's sexual orientation, you have to take into account their sex. All right. If a person is married to a man and you decide, well, you're a man who's married to another man, therefore I'm going to discriminate against you, but you wouldn't have discriminated against them if they were a woman, then by necessity, you are taking sex into account.
Mm-hmm.
If a person is transgender, if a person is a trans woman, all right, someone who was born with a penis but identifies as a woman, if they had been born with a vagina, then you wouldn't discriminate against them.
Mm-hmm.
But because they were born with a penis, you are discriminated against them, which by necessity, again, that means that you are taking sex into account when you are discriminating against that person.
Mm-hmm.
And the Supreme Court has upheld that.
Yeah. So there, yeah, I agree. There is a ray of sunshine. I will say for so many of these laws, I mean, we talked about it right at the beginning. They're so vague. So many of these laws are so vague or so poorly written or so clearly unconstitutional that at some point, if it ever gets to a district, a federal district court or an appeals court or even the Supreme Court that's reasonable in any sense, they will be overturned.
Yeah.
But the problem is it takes so long to get there, sometimes years. And in the meantime, people will die.
Yeah. And Ron DeSantis doesn't even care about that. This is a virtue signal. He's trying to get people to vote for him. He doesn't give a shit about this. He doesn't care about this one way or another.
Yep.
All right.
For sure.
He's doing, he doesn't care if it gets struck down. If it gets struck down, he can just be like, well, I tried and I fought really hard and we just need to get more conservatives into the judgeship. So keep voting for me.
Yes,
like,
exactly. It's a win-win.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a win-win completely. Real quick. You know what I will say? This specific law does not carve out any exception for political ideology in terms of discrimination, which means that maybe a doctor within the state of Florida could have a moral objection against treating douchebags. And if a douchebag, specifically maybe Ron DeSantis, were to get sick and go to the doctors, I sincerely hope that doctor does not have a moral objection to treating douchebags, because nobody should be denied medical care, in my opinion.
Oh, man. I love you, buddy. The best. Okay, so on in the parade of horribles. The second set of laws that were recently signed were a bunch of sweeping anti-trans bills in the state. So these were laws that restricted gender-affirming treatment for minors and adults, limitations on access to drag shows for minors, and all adult entertainment as well. And finally, Ron DeSantis rolls out a bathroom usage bill, as well as a bill that prevents how pronouns can be used in school. So literally, bills controlling the words that you can say, the medicine you can receive, the entertainment you can watch, and the toilet you can pee in.
So, tell me again, which party is the party of personal freedom?
Yeah, it's oh god, it's
Jesus
overwhelming.
Christ.
It's so absurd. So, under the law, a bunch of things are included in these laws. So, one, a court could intervene, temporarily removing a child from their home if they receive gender-affirming treatment, which includes like puberty blockers, hormone replacements, and that those treatments would count as child abuse.
So state-sanctioned kidnapping. Okay.
Yes, exactly. And again, these are treatments that are supported by the American Medical Association, right? This is a decision between you and your doctor. We're not talking about experimental, maybe if I take out their kidneys, they'll live longer. No, this is real medicine that these people are being denied, and that is being criminalized.
And I mean, do we have to go through it again? Study after study has shown that gender affirming care for minors, age appropriate, mind you, gender affirming care for minors prevents suicide.
Mm-hmm.
This law means more dead children. All right. Anytime any law restricts access to gender affirming care for minors, it is a dead children law.
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly. Yeah. And it even goes so far as and make it possible for Florida courts to modify child custody agreements from other states if the minor is likely to receive gender affirming care in the second state. So if like maybe you thought like, oh, well, maybe these parents are going to have to move out of Florida in order to seek gender affirming care. Literally, if there's a custody arrangement that touches Florida, they can reach into that other state and modify the agreement in order to prevent that child in another state from getting gender affirming care. On top of this, one measure in these set of laws restricts adults seeking gender affirming care and transgender medical treatment. Right? So in one of the smaller restrictions, it only allows physicians to offer gender affirming care. So not nurse practitioners, and not other medical providers that are able to do that. So, but in an incredible overreach into the medical lives of people, even beyond what we've come to expect from Florida, patients will be required to receive written consent on a form that is overseen by two boards made up of appointments by the governor. So, like, we're talking about like infringing on even adults' ability to access their medical care.
So I think we need to take a second and look at that real quick, because the argument from these people at the very beginning was, hey, we're pro freedom and all. It's just like, we have concerns about pushing this on your kids because like kids, they're too young. Like they're too young to know who they are. And, we don't want them to go through some type of medical procedure that's going to alter them for life before they know who they are. Like, it's not about discrimination. It's about protecting the kids. And an argument like that, when you don't look more in depth into how gender affirming care for minors actually works, an argument like that might sound appealing to people. But that was never what they were trying to do. Mm-hmm. It was always about discrimination. Yeah. It was always about discrimination against trans people. Yep. It was always about violating personal freedom. All right? So don't believe them when they say it's about protecting the children. That is complete bullshit. First off, they're killing children. But second off, it's not just about children. It's about trans people.
Yep.
They're discriminating against trans people directly, and it's for some type of political gain.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, like, you can't get much more transparent than passing a fucking bathroom bill, right?
Yeah.
Which was recently passed in this sweeping, like slate of legislation. So basically, it prohibits transgender people from using a bathroom or changing room that matches their gender identity while in government buildings, including schools, prisons, and state universities. Literally regulating where you can pee. On top of that, it passed a bill that restricts the use of pronouns of choice in public schools by faculty and students. Literally, you can't have people call you a specific thing if the pronoun is not what was like. It's not like he, she, and matches your biological sex. The bill declares that a person's sex is an immutable biological trait and that it is false to use a pronoun other than the sex on a person's birth certificate.
How is that the government's how is that the government's business?
No one is allowed to call you any other name except for your name. Signed bill by someone named Ronald called Ron. Like, it's fucking absurd. And it sucks.
It's fascistic. It is straight up fascistic.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And finally, the legislation would threaten to take away licenses for establishments to operate if children are let into any adult live performance, which is largely interpreted as drag shows. So that's just the anti-trans stuff. Now we have the education stuff, which is like, even like, it's so over the top. So, okay, a few things. The thing that's getting the most headlines is a bill that was recently passed that removes public funding for or defunds diversity, equity, and inclusion programs at public colleges in Florida. So this particular bill does two big things and then a little thing that we'll talk about. It directly prohibits diversity, equity, and inclusion programs and says that it prohibits any federal or state funds from being spent on programs that, quote, advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion or promote or engage in political or social activism. Thank God they're saving us
inclusion.
From all that inclusion and equity and diversity. What a shame. On top of that, the law prevents public colleges from offering general education courses that, quote, distort significant historical events or are, quote, based on theories that systemic racism, sexism, oppression, or privilege are inherent in the institutions of the United States and were created to maintain social, political, or economic inequalities.
That's what you do to prove that there's no racism in America. Pass laws that make it so you can't talk about racism. That's how you prove that.
Yeah, literally preventing people from talking about like racism or sexism or oppression or privilege. Like, what are they going to teach in social science classes? It's gonna be like 8 weeks to cover fucking all of them. History. It's like that is.
It's like
so much of Western
white
history.
people came to America. A bunch of Indians mysteriously disappeared for reasons we have no idea. We have
but
no
we're
idea what
unconnected to.
White people had some workers who happened to be black that were very gracious to pick their crops for them. And then there was a random war where people fought each other over tariffs or whatever. It was called the Civil War. It was just tariffs and, some other civil disputes or whatever, but it was no big deal. And then those black people suddenly stopped picking all of those crops and started being more included in society because I don't know how you're going to fucking teach that without teaching about racism. Like I was literally
dude,
trying to.
You're joking.
I'm joking, but
like
how?
But that's the thing. That's it's beyond parody. That's exactly what's happening. I think we talked about this one time on the show, but there's a book, a social studies book for I think elementary schoolers that talked about the Rosa Parks story. Have you heard about this?
No, I haven't.
Originally, the text in the book talked about Rosa Parks, enacting civil disobedience, refusing to move to the back of the bus where she was required to sit because of her race, right? This is now the text of that book when discussing the Rosa Parks story in order to avoid the discussion of race in schools. Quote, Rosa Parks showed courage. One day she rode the bus. She was told to move to a different seat. She did not. She did what she believed was right.
Wow.
Yep.
Wow.
Your jokes that they would just leave that out is exactly what's being taught in Florida schools at this point because of laws like this. And now it's beyond even...
Fuck, don't get any ideas from me. Don't get any ideas. That was a joke.
Now it's beyond K through 12.
Ron DeSantis, I know you're probably listening. I know you're a huge fan of the show. But don't get any ideas from what I just said. That was a joke.
Yep. And now they are prohibiting this at this kind of teaching at the fucking college level.
God, I hate it when they pass law, like when idiots pass laws about what you can teach in elementary schools and and grade school and shit. But I seethe when they fuck with universities.
Yeah.
For personal reasons.
but also societal ones. Universities are so often a transition point. It's the time when you are taken out of the bubble you've spent your whole life in and you get exposed to the world. And to take that environment and dilute it and pervert it so much that it no longer represents the world is to destroy the value of that experience and largely the value of higher education and the liberal arts.
Yeah. Look, I would just like to point out, I got exposed to so many different points of view in college. And in fact, I actually got exposed to much more intelligent versions of conservative arguments than I had
Yes.
ever heard at home.
Thanks.
Like, well,
I'm just joking. If you know the history of the show, you know why that's a joke.
present company excluded.
Perfect.
Present company excluded. But like, you know, I most people back where I lived made the dumbest regurgitation of talking points.
Yeah, of course.
When they were advocating for specific conservative arguments. Again, present company excluded. And when I got to college, I was actually exposed. Like, obviously, I had plenty of professors that were more on the liberal side, but I had plenty of professors that were also more on the conservative side, and plenty of professors that spent a lot of, like, in my political science classes, that spent time talking about conservative politics and discussing, like, political philosophy from a conservative point of view that was way more intelligent and way more, like, reasonable sounding than anything I'd ever heard.
Yeah.
College is the time where you should be exposed to multiple different viewpoints. Like, I'm not saying that there isn't some cause for concern when professors go out of their way to make sure that their own ideology dominates the talking of the class.
Yeah, it's a bad class.
Like, but college is about, especially in the humanities, college is about discussion.
Yeah.
It's about arguments.
Yeah.
It's about smart engagement. And by limiting engagement, which, by the way, you're always talking about the fact that limiting engagement is detrimental to a society in the context of free speech. You're always talking about that. Fucking live your values for once.
Yeah, dude, they literally just passed a law to enforce that, but only for basically their point of view. Yeah. It's remarkable. So I just have one more thing to say about these courses, right? So people can still major in, like, African American studies, gender studies, the concepts that are largely prohibited at these schools. But the board of governors for the universities are required to review the programs and curriculum and identify any that run afoul of the laws, which makes the worry that even in classes that are supposed to touch on these concepts, that there will be a chilling effect on these teachings, which is exactly clearly what the bill intends. DeSantis literally said that students who want to study, quote, niche subjects, such as critical race theory, ought to look elsewhere. Florida's getting out of the game. It's literally meant to just take these classes out of anybody's curriculum. And how do you become an African American studies major or a gender studies major? You learn about it in your other classes, and then it piques your interest, and then you go learn about them more. Like, the clear intention here is to remove these concepts from the curriculum and just reduce the quality of education in Florida.
And again, it started out as, oh, we're removing this stuff from, from grade school to protect the children. But that's never what it was about. It was always about trying to control the education. Yeah. Because when you control the education, you control the minds of the future.